going on, guys? Scott Newby from Bass Brings Us Together. Thanks for joining me. Haven't been on here live in a little bit. A lot of stuff going on, like always. Certainly always trying to drop some fresh content on you guys, bring on special guests, entertain the community in any way that I can. It's Friday the 9th, or Friday the 7th. I don't know where my mind's at. I've worked 2 insane nights this week to where I did like 20 hours, took a few hour break, did another 20 hours. But I hope everybody's doing well. Thanks for coming by, spending your Friday night with us. I already see people lining up in the chat, which is obviously awesome. I've been stockpiling a bunch of questions about when I put the post about the future of Bass Brings Us Together. I talked with Steve Mead, the new JTR 218 touring. So I'm going to do another live maybe Sunday or Monday and certainly knock out a lot of those questions and hang out with you guys about that. Super Bowl weekend. Hopefully my squares hit. Hopefully you guys are doing well. Just want to thank everybody, our sponsors, anybody that's likes and subscribes, shows us support in any way. Kat and I are certainly, just excited that this community has grown so much over, we started this like 16 months ago. Now we're pushing 8,000 subscribers. We got like 12,000 people in our Facebook group. Instagram's doing well. It's just cool to all the interactions, having get-togethers, people coming over to hang out with us. I don't know. It's all surreal, basically, as we're just having a good time and you guys are here with us for the ride. So I will be on an episode of Audioholics coming up, I believe, here in a couple of weeks. Don asked me to participate in a live chat with the Audioholics guys, and I'll also be on Shane Lee's channel as well. I believe that is going to be next week or the week after, but I'll certainly share that on our Facebook and YouTube community and stuff too. So I got a bunch of people already in the chat. Thanks for coming by. Mike Stevens, Paul Griggs, Sciphonics Audio, Van Gool. So got a special guest this evening. He actually, when I first started this channel, did a huge favor, came on, talked about amplifiers and stuff with me. So I think that was about a year or so ago. His company is growing. Our channel's been growing. It's cool. Everybody's been pumped up all week, man. We can't wait for that special guest. So without further ado, and I'm sure you guys are waiting already 3 minutes in. You're like, don't want to look at me. Where's that special guest at? My boy Dylan. Now,
how's it going?
From Buckeye Amps. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. If you're on any of the Facebook groups or if you went to M-Wave or actually if you're going to a lot of home theater get-togethers now, I don't know, Buckeye Amps is getting brought up. So I gotta say, man, kudos to you, Dylan. First of all, man, you can't have. I have people over at the house almost every month, and I got your new mono blocks in, which absolutely just hammer my speakers to death. Those things are, first of all, man, they're monsters.
Yeah, if you need, they're, and for the cost, you're getting up to 2,500 watts into 4 ohms in that enclosure. Perfect for especially if you're doing your own subs or passive subs. But no, those things are a beast. And we're glad we were finally able to. It's something I wanted to bring in to the product line, but it really didn't make sense until we also brought in the new Purifi because they share the same input board. So being the company that I am, I'm small in terms of I do all the work. I'm always trying to make things as streamlined as possible. So I didn't want to have 4 different SKUs for input boards and all that. So it was nice that this year with doing our work to bring in the new Purifi mono blocks, we were able to incorporate those Hypex that you're using now, and they're beasts.
Yeah, the amplifier I had before, I certainly enjoyed that company too. It's too bad that they're not around anymore. And I'm going to be honest. I'll be honest with the community. Is I've heard multiple of your products before. That's why I was interested in getting those amps. But I was like, man, I hope they don't sound different or anything. And dude, they sound perfect. No background noise. Like, and the RTJs have huge, like 22-inch horns. So I stick my whole head in the horn, dude. I couldn't hear nothing.
Yeah.
And now I use Rotel amps in the theater that I'm sitting in now. I used to use one of those amps on those speakers, and you could hear a hiss.
Yeah.
Rotel amps. but nothing.
No, but
And
that's
no protect.
yeah, and no, and that's the great thing with the Hypex and Purifi, and what they've done is the noise floor is just it's non-existent. I myself run 101 decibel sensitive, and that's the sensitivity overall. They're the JBL Cinema arrays, so I can only guess that the compression drivers in those are probably at least 105 or higher. And I'm running the Hypex MCX 500 for those. Again, like you said, I can put my ear right up to it, and I don't hear anything. Which before my first experience in Class D was 12 years ago when I had a small theater that I was putting together on a college budget, and I was like, oh, I'm going to pick up some Crown amplifiers. They have massive power, and man, on a regular Paradigm speaker of like 88 sensitivity, those things, their noise floor is terrible. So that's why one of the things I've always tried to do with this business and coming on these things is remind people the Class D that people might have been exposed to originally with the cheap options with Crown and stuff, car amplifiers. This is not that anymore. The Hypex and Purifi is not those old notions. You can throw them on clips. You can throw them on these high sensitivity speakers. And like you said, your noise floor is dead silent and you're getting some of the cleanest sound possible.
Yeah. And, one of the reasons why I was looking for more powerful amplifiers, because those were underpowered. Now, what I was really looking for the people that aren't aware of this is I always had to cross and I use huge speakers in the living room with subs, but I always had to cross the mains over at like 100 hertz because the amp I had, if I tried to go 80 or 90 hertz during like rock music, they would go into protect. But I'm not gonna lie, dude. I took your amps. I bought those amps. They haven't lived an easy life over here.
No, that's fine.
I dropped my mains down to like 40 and 50 and 60 hertz and just cranked the crap out of them. Dude, those amps won't give up, dude. They will not give up.
No, that in a different design, but one of the Purifi monoblocks, we were actually talking about Ryan, his old setup for Ascend AV was the Pro Listons he had for his LCRs, and they dipped below 0.7 ohm in a certain frequency response. And he had amps for years that he said would go into protection because he would play.
You mean the Martin Logans?
Or was his the Martin Logans?
Yeah, because I went down there and auditioned that.
Yeah,
system, and he was using your Purifi monoblocks. He goes,
the Martin Logans, and they would trip anything before that. He said if he tried to, because he listens loud, he uses those Martin Logans as actual theater speakers at reference level, and he finally put on our Purifis, and he never had an issue. Just like your NCX, your Hypex ones, they're stable. They'll play low. They'll play a lot of wattage as they're rated, and you won't have an issue.
So Dropzone says he has a Buckeye Purifi on the 3722 ends. No, yeah, that was one of my only concerns, because when I heard Buckeye and all the other setups, I've heard it in 15 different setups, is I never had the space to myself to do those kind of tests. So that was the first thing I did. And once it was dead silent, dude, I was so happy. So no, dude, I just smooth interaction, buying amps from you, getting them in, set up. I mean, and really the only question I had was that low, medium, high switch on it. And I mean,
and I remind people the gain is meant to match with the source. So I get a lot of people that say, I just set up, but I'm running they'll ask me like, well, I'm running these speakers. What should I set the gain to? Well, it actually depends on your source. The gain isn't meant to match the speaker unless there's caveats there depending on how you're building the system. But for the normal person, it's meant to match the source. So if, as I tell people, the easiest thing is if you're running a receiver, pretty much always use high gain on our amps, because you're going to need as much gain as you can, because the receiver on their pre-outs usually aren't putting out more than maybe 2 volts. There are some that put out more. On a processor or a good DAC or anything else, then you can start matching that. If you have like a AVM, like an Anthem AVM that can put up, I think, up to 6 or 7 volts, you could run medium gain, and that's more just to match that you're not going to clip. But again, it's just a quick clarification for anyone watching that might be interested. If you're ever wondering where the gain comes in, remember you're matching the source. It's not so much the speakers, which the speakers play a role in it, obviously. Because if you have too much gain and can lead to clipping, yeah, it's bad for the speakers, but it's based on your source.
Yeah, because I used a Parison. That's when I messaged you, and the Parison, I think, put out 5 or 6. You're like, yeah, put on medium, and it's a perfect match.
Yeah, and especially with the NC2K that you have, they have a higher gain structure than our other amps just by default because of how Hypex puts them. So medium for yours works really well, as you just said. Yeah.
So yeah, I've listened to everything on it, and I've had guys over it, and they just, dude, it's perfect. If you're looking for an amp that'll just beat the crap out of your speakers and just do it, with no background noise or anything at all, absolutely perfect fit for me. I couldn't be happier. So first of all, I just want to say thanks. Nice smooth transaction, worked out just how I wanted it. So that's cool. I already see people asking questions. I already got a whole list of questions. So if you don't mind,
that's fine.
Okay. I mean, I figure you didn't come on here to model for us this evening.
I always love, wherever the conversation leads though with audio, it's always, like I said, the reason why I love this so much is I was a hobbyist before starting the business, and I love to be a hobbyist. Like even when I go on forums and answer questions, I know it shows Buckeye Amps on AVS and ASR is my handle, but I'm still there trying to answer questions in other threads as a hobbyist. It's fun to just keep these conversations going and let people learn.
All right, first question up from Flyers 10AZ. First of all, thanks for hopping on with us tonight. He's asking, is 8-channel the max capability of an NC252?
For us right now, yes, and that's just because of the chassis size. There are competitors I know that might go up to 16 channels, and it's basically it comes down to still trying to be affordable. I mean, I could design a chassis that's a lot bigger and go up to maybe 16 channels with the NC252, but then the price increases to where you're probably going to take up almost as much room as just doing 2 8-channels anyways. Or so it's kind of just a trade-off. There's a premium to it. Like you'll notice with our 8-channel NC502, there's a pretty steep increase from the price of the 6-channel in that model to the 8-channel. And most of that price increase is just to be able to fit that one extra module. Whereas if you look at our 6-channel 252 and step up to an 8-channel 252, the price increase is kind of linear. Like it's not a huge step because it's the same chassis and we're just fitting the same size requirement. So yeah, we could offer more. But again, that comes down to, well, the design for it would then put the price a lot higher or into dimensions that most people don't use. Right now, all of our non-rack mounted cases are 17 inches wide or less. And there's a reason for that, because a lot of shelving units are 20 inches wide at most. Or if you even use a rack shelving and you don't rack mount it, you have about 18 inches of width max. So I always try and keep my amps ergonomical in terms of how wide and how deep they should be. So for me to go to 10, 12, 14 channel NC252, I'm either have to go really high, really deep, really wide. It adds to it.
And then, of course, it always works as person's like, man, I wish you made that wider or taller. And then, yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, it doesn't always, there's some people that would love to have a wider chassis to get more channels. But then a lot of people that have certain, especially I'm looking at my Salamander 3 across, 2 up and down unit that I couldn't fit a 20-inch chassis on any of the shelves I'm looking at. So it's like, it's a kind of a trade-off. I will say there is possibly within this year, I would say at the end of the year, maybe. It's nothing I've announced officially because it's up to Hypex, but it won't be any new advancement of their technology. So if someone's out there saying, oh, is there something around the corner that's going to be even better? No, but there is a new form factor module that might be coming out in the NC252 502 range that might make it easier for us to build up to 16 channels. So that's possibly on the radar for this year for those who really want to have all-in-one, 16 channel. But it's nothing I'm going to announce because again, when it's out, it's out. That's all I can say. But again, if anyone's sitting there like, oh, Dylan just said that there's, an advancement coming out. No. It's not anything that's advancing the level of sound or anything. It's just helping form factor wise for companies like me that might be able to offer more channels finally in an appropriate size case. But as it stands right now, 8 channels is where it's at. And for someone that needs 16 channels, the easiest thing is buy 2 of them. And if you put an AC Infinity Aircom on top of the first one and then stack the amp on top of that, good to go. And that's how light they are, that you could stack them like that. So you can easily fit 2 8-channel of those amps with an Infinity Air Comm in about total of 10 inches of height is what it would be. So just food for thought for anyone looking for, that type of amplification and needs more than one chassis.
C Big is asking, and he didn't put what model, and if he did it, I mean, we probably wouldn't know what model anyway, but he's asking, can 8-channel 252 run 4-ohm RBH speakers? So, I mean, just can it run 8 4-ohm speakers simultaneously,
Easily.
just in general?
Oh, easily. The 252 is rated stable down to 2 ohm per channel, all channels driven. So 4 ohm, perfect. You're no issues there.
These boys are busy in the chat. I will start going through some of the chat, but I'm gonna.
You're fine.
I wrote a bunch of questions out because once people heard you were coming on, they're like, "Can you ask Dylan this? Can you ask Dylan that?" So the first question that I got written down from Paul was, "What kind of power requirements are required for most of the amps?" I was looking on his website and doing some research on his amplifiers. I see some amps even have dual power cords.
So, as shocked as some people might be, you can run, for instance, in my theater room on 120 amp circuit, I have 14 channels of NC502 power, 3 channels of NCX 500 power, the JVC NZ9000, the 900, their newest one, LED projector, laser projector, sorry. My AVM, my Anthem AVM, all my components and lighting all on 120 amp circuit, and it's not an issue. The reason for that is your peak power draw during any consumer content, whether it's music or movies, and even if you're listening at reference, is very short. So even if you had, let's say, 8 full range speakers running down to 20 hertz, you're not even using subwoofers, and you have one of our 8-channel amps hooked up, for instance, the theoretical max that an 8-channel NC502 can draw is 4,000 watts peak. But even with running all 8 channels on a full range speaker, watching consumer movie content at reference level, you're never going to come near to drawing that peak level. Your surrounds won't do it. Your Atmos won't do it. The LCR, maybe you can make a case for that, but then you bring in peak. So even for a home audio or a home breaker, most breakers have to be rated, I believe it's 30 to 40% above max for instantaneous draw, which is why like if you turn on a circular saw, your lights dim, because even though the circular saw might not draw more than 15 amps continuous while you're using it, that startup is a huge current kick increase. All that saying that on a normal 15 amp circuit, if you wanted to ask me how many of my channels of my amps could you hook up, easily 16 channels on a normal 15 amp circuit without any issues, because there's a lot of factors involved where even if you hit that peak draw of every channel, which isn't going to happen, but in the rare case it does, even your home breaker panel is going to be able to handle that quick, instantaneous half-second power surge without any issues. Why we have 2 plugs, for instance, on that 8-channel 502, it's more for the internal wiring. I didn't want to have all 4 modules sharing the same inlet wiring internally. So it was easier to split it to 2 external plugs. But for instance, you could put both those plugs into a properly rated power strip or surge protector and have that on the same outlet on your wall without issue.
Also,
all this saying Class D amplification, worrying about power draw when you're not talking about subwoofers is very, very low priority, because it's not something you're going to run into an issue with.
So like on that one with the dual power cords, if somebody's building a room, they can run that amp off of just one dedicated circuit.
Yeah, I mean, in my living room, all my everything, TV, my amps, one circuit. In my theater room, as I just said, everything besides the subs on one circuit.
Yeah.
And never had an issue. I can watch, Top Gun. I can watch any movie at reference, and leave the lights on in the movie room just for whatever reason, and then you'll never even see them dim.
Yeah, and because when I first got the mono blocks in from you, I wasn't using the subwoofer amps. I was just running the speakers full range themselves, and I mean I could play it so loud I couldn't stand it, and I never blew the breaker. And that was the two big mono blocks on one 20 amp circuit.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can definitely pull a lot of power out of it. So yeah, so Paul, that's a great answer. I'm going to answer the live questions first because obviously these people are on here. This one actually takes part of another question I had written down.
No, color options are back. I brought them back a couple months ago. They were off for a while because ProtoCase, it was hard to do one-off color. We basically struck an accord where I can't order a custom color case with my quoting system like I used to. But now if someone wants a custom color, I just basically, without any extra cost other than what the customer is paying to cover it, I can get their cases done without any extended lead time that it might have taken or extra cost on my end. So long story short, I've worked it out with ProtoCase that custom colors are now back on. What I can't do anymore, because the cost would be astronomical to the consumer, is anodizing. So you can get custom powder coats again. The colors are on the website, but I no longer do anodizing for the cases, which means you can't get like the actual silver, aluminum silver finish, the gold finish, like the raw metal finish. You can't do those like I briefly did offer.
I see some people in here asking, I just seen this brought up again. For new orders, I mean, what's your typical wait time right now, Dylan?
Right now, it's about 2 to 3 weeks from order to build from order to ship time. We were down to about 10 days, but as I was talking right with you right before we got on, got a huge rush right after the holidays of orders, so it's pushed out a little bit. For those that still wonder, I am Buckeye Amps. I do the emails. Any email you send is me answering it. Any phone call, anything, it's me. Building, shipping, ordering, everything is me. So I did have to raise the wait times a little bit, but it's still under 3 weeks for any new orders.
Mike has a question, and this actually ties in with one of the other questions, so we can bring this up. Thanks for chiming in, Mike, and hanging out with us. So the Polk Legend L800s, I'm familiar with them. They use a certain technology. I forgot what it's called off the top of my head, but just basically, and we can tie this in with another question, is between like the Purifi and the Hypex modules, can we hear a difference? And if we can, is it more room dependent, speaker dependent, amplifier dependent? Like where are we splitting hairs at this point, or what's
for those two, for the Purifi modules and the Hypex NCX 500, they're virtually identical for what you're going to hear. The difference is for those two come down to power. The base Purifi is slightly less power than the Hypex NCX 500, whereas the Purifi module, the Purifi monoblock, the 9040 is a little more power. But those not only measure almost the same on a benchtop, but they're going to sound identical in your room. That's just where we're at. The slightly older Hypex Encore, so like my NC252 and NC502, those are going to sound a little different. I won't say worse, a little higher noise floor basically, and you might start to hear a little distortion at very high volume compared to the Purifi or the NCX 500. But what I tell people when they come to me is, unless you're doing critical like if someone says, hey, I need 8 channels, I have a 7-channel home theater setup. What should I do? If they say, hey, I just listen to movies only, I'm going to tell them the NC252 or 502 because that's the best for the home theater. If they were to say, well, I do critical 2-channel listening in the same room with the same front, left, right speakers, then I'll start to say, well, that's where you may hear a slightly better difference with the Purifi or the NCX 500 for the LCR. And then, the surrounds and Atmos, you can stick on the older Encore. But when people come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at the 2-channel NCX 500 or the 2-channel Purifi, besides the price difference, which one do I pick? I tell them toss a coin, because they're gonna sound the same and virtually perform the same. The NCX 500 has a little more power. The Purifi will run slightly cooler, but those differences there are like cooler maybe by 3 to 4 degrees, power maybe one and a half decibel more headroom with the NC. So like you're splitting hairs.
Yeah,
that's and this is I always give the same information whenever a customer reaches out to me. I never try to upsell. So again, if someone ever comes to me and says I only listen to movies, I've had people come to me and say, "Hey, would you price me out for 3 channel Purifis for my setup?" And I was like, "Well, what are you using it for?" "Just movies." And I'll steer them. Even though that might be a little more money for me, that's a waste of money on your part, because you're not going to hear a difference for just movies with that technology. So again, it may sound weird to some people that I might steer them away from the more high costing product on my end, but I try to always be honest when someone emails me, like, here's the differences, here's where you should and shouldn't spend that money.
Yeah, that was actually one of the questions I had too on here. Is somebody was asking, will we ever get a big Purifi multi-channel amp set up? But I mean, that kind of just answered it.
Yes, I will say yes, we will, but it's not a priority. It's one of those things where eventually I want to roll it out to offer up to 5 channels, but because that extra cost is basically wasted on the consumer for surround speakers, except maybe multi-channel setups, which most people don't use, or sorry, multi-channel music setups. It's not a priority for me to rush to get that out there just so someone will spend more money on it.
Yeah. Well, these guys are keeping you busy on here, Dylan, tonight. So Home Theater Expert says he's been in contact with Dylan. He wants to know better. So if cost is not an issue and he's not going to be powering subwoofers, I'm assuming that the sound here is going to be the same. It's just power, right?
Well, I don't know if he means the NC 502 or the NCX 500, and he forgot the X on that. I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe if he means the original NC 500, but we don't carry that because it's been replaced by the NCX 500.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe he'll chime. So he's probably looking at the current setup. So it's in a 2-channel setup. So the NC 252 is a current model, right?
Yeah, that's, like I said, that's that original Encore. So the NC, just if someone is even thinking this in their mind, the NC 252 and the NC 502 we offer belong to what Hypex calls their MP, or their mains powered line. So that's an all-in-one module. That's why if you look at those builds, everything is on one piece and one module. It's the power supply, it's SMPS power supply, and the amplifier module all in one. And those are really good for them. That's why we offer them in the multi-channel up to 8-channel builds. The NCX 500 and same with the Purifis, those are just the amplifier module. And then you'll see if you look at our builds, we have to use a separate power supply module. So if anyone's ever wondered the difference, that's why it's kind of easier to upgrade, like for Hypex to say, hey, let's build a new version of the NC 500. Like let's do the next iteration of that, because they're just building the amplifier. That's why it's been a long time and we still don't have the next version of the mains powered. So we don't have like an NC 252 XMP series, because it takes a lot for them to go to the next iteration of that, because it's both a power supply and a amplifier. Just a little side bit on that try to make sure people don't get confused. So if you're ever looking at any of ours that go up to 8-channel, it's the MP series, because they're all in one modules. The monos, the 2-channel Purifi and NCX 500, and the 3 channels are different beasts, because their amplifier and power supply are both different.
So, and just because I seen another question that somebody wrote me yesterday, just so everybody, because people were curious, is Dylan just the front man or the salesman of Buckeye, or does he actually design and build the amps? So every amp is hand assembled by you, correct?
Yeah. So every amp I build put together, assemble, build, test, package, and ship. The main amplifier portion, so the if it's the amplifier module or the power supply or both, are Hypex and Purifi. In some of our models, you might see we advertise Micro Audio. They build power supplies as well. Those I do not design. Those are in the capable hands of Hypex and Purifi, who are leaps and bounds ahead of, I mean, even other amplifier companies that have been around out there with their design and their implementation. They offer their product to people like me, to an OEM, to build around. So I don't design, for instance, any of the Purifi amplifier modules. I buy them from Purifi. Where I have to design is the input board is the big part of that. So Purifi sells me their amplifier module, but you need an interface board that'll properly allow connection to the amplifier module without degrading the sound. And that's where the big portion, besides me building and assembling, the other big portion I do with Buckeye, and I have an electrical engineer who helps me with this part, is designing those input boards to interface everything and make sure there isn't a loss of sound. There isn't a degradation from what Purifi expects with their product, or Hypex. So there is design to this, but I don't directly design any of the actual amplifier technology itself. That's pre-designed, pre-tested, and strict standards of quality control, everything down the line that's handed off to me to build around. And that's why, if someone has a follow-up question, that's why some competitors are a lot more than what we charge, because they may, I'm not going to name anyone, but they may say, well, our input board is, uses silver tracing and all whatever fancy stuff, and they may charge an extra $1,000 for that. But at the end of the day, anyone that's offering the Purifi or the Hypex that I build, anything that they offer, it's the same cost to us for those amplifier modules and those power supplies. So their cost difference is because of other stuff they're doing that I know doesn't make a sonic difference, and everyone else that's objective knows, but it does make a wallet difference for them. And I'm always frank about that. People do ask me, hey, what's the difference between you and X company? Mine is I don't upcharge. I don't upcharge for things that don't make a difference. I don't sell snake oil.
It's weird. It's okay for me to say this now because I already bought the amps. But I felt a little guilty that I was underpaying. I was like, this is too much power. Like, dude, I mean, I got like 5,000 watts of amplification for like just over $2,000. I mean, that doesn't happen anywhere. With zero noise floor, low distortion, no clipping, no protection circuits coming in.
So Scott, again, I'm not going to name. There's a company that sells that exact mono that I sold you. I sold you two for a little over two. I think it was for 2,000-ish for both.
Yeah, it was like $2,200 or something, right around there. Yeah.
There's a company that sells that same exact setup. So it's the same Hypex module, the same Hypex power supply, and it's in a mono configuration for $2,800 per mono block. It's gonna guarantee you put them on a bench and measure them, they're gonna sound and perform the same because it's the same exact module from Hypex. But they found a way to charge almost 3 times as much as me because of you can go look at it and tell me if the case it's in is worth that upcharge.
Or some fancy wording or something around it.
No, and again, I'm gonna be nice and not call anyone out, but that's why sometimes I laughed at some people. They value paying. I know that company, what they're making per those monoblocks, they're making an arm and a leg in profit for what they're selling, but they justify it because they have their case is nicer, or they use binding posts that might cost them $10 more, but they'll pass it off as $200 more to the customer. Yeah. That's why I remind people is I do get a lot. How are yours cheaper? Does that mean they don't sound as good? Blah, blah, blah. No, they're all based on, all of us are using the same technology. Mine is just passing on the savings as I've started this business, and I still do now, to the consumer so that they can get audiophile type quality at a price that everyone can afford. That's no longer locked into spending $5,000 on an amplifier for it to be considered audiophile quality.
Yeah, and it blended in well. I mean, to me, the looks, because it blends in with the Parasound and the other amps I have, and it was actually amazing because the blue LED that you use on there is the same shade of blue as Parasound, so it all matches perfect. So no complaints from me. So Pavel, I certainly appreciate the super chat, man. All of this helps run the channel and pay for StreamYard and internet connections. So thanks a lot. Obviously, you're a big fan of Buckeye as well with Hypex 2 channel and 9 channels of Purify for my home theater rack. Recommend without hesitation. Not gonna lie, I've visited quite a few theaters, and you don't ever really see anybody say anything bad about. I mean, I've never heard anybody complain about Buckeye. Actually, you're getting a lot of praise in here that you do a great job of packaging.
Yeah. So, and I there have been, we don't use custom like foam, because that costs a lot. I mean, that's something that's passed on. I use really thick bubble wrap. I use thin bubble wrap for the amplifiers, for scratch and stuff, but I use air cushioning type thick bubble wrap. And I've just gotten good at knowing, the only damage I ever get from UPS, besides a rare one that happens to maybe a smaller, it's always the 8-channel. And I found where the damage comes from, even with my packaging, that I've been able to mitigate it because, as I talked to you, I've gotten it down to less than 1% of any issues with UPS. And for me, that's a win because UPS, I know everyone can argue. I actually prefer UPS over FedEx for various reasons. But for me to be able to get below 1% issue rate with UPS, I'm happy with that. And for anyone watching, if you ever do get it, it's not, I don't ever pass it on to the customer. If UPS does anything to the amp on the way and it shows up in any way you don't like that it's damaged, there's lots of routes I give. You can return it for a full refund. You can get a replacement. A lot of people, because if there is an issue, if it's ever happened, like I said, I did find out it's the exact back corner where it seemed to always happen. If it's out of sight, I mean, there's people I offer money off if it's damp. I mean, so no, I don't ever stick anyone with, oh, well, it's not my problem. UPS did it, live with it. But no, I've learned over the years the best way to package, to mitigate that. And I'm proud of it because, like I said, I know what all the shipping companies, what the packages go through. So we've gotten it down to where it's just normally not an issue. Every now and then there's the rare one that doesn't survive because it almost looks like it got run over, and that I can't prevent. Yeah. When your package looks like it has tire marks on it, there's nothing I can do for. I mean, I'll still get you the right one and work with. I don't mean nothing I can do for you. I just mean there's nothing I can do to prevent that from happening.
I had all these questions written down. These guys are just hammering away here. Well, I can definitely agree with you here, Pavel. Before I even met Dylan, started talking with Dylan, it was cool to see him on the forums and just interacting. It wasn't like, hey, I build these awesome amps. If you buy one, just set up my website. I'm going to have nothing to do with you. So it's certainly cool of him just kind of being an open book, just, talking about his design philosophy. And so, yeah, definitely you get props from the home theater and audio community for that, Dylan, for sure.
No, I appreciate it. Like I said, I've been in the AVS since 2009, and other than changing my handle for my business name, I'm still there. Like, after I get off here, people think I'm always working, which I kind of am, but it's just, if I didn't have the job, I'd still be on ASR, AVS forums as myself. So I'm just always there, even though it may seem like, wow, Buckeye Amps is posting at 1 a.m. Like they may think I don't have a life or something. Like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm tied to my phone, but it's not in a way like everyone says, oh, it's bad. Everyone's on their phone nowadays. Well, I'm not at TikTok. I'm just on the forums. I'm just looking at what you guys are talking about. Like, I'm just tied to my phone that way, and it doesn't bother me.
And, and it's just more of our generation because 20 years ago, everybody had a stereo review magazine they were looking at.
Yes.
We just have our phone. So it's all the same, just different, No,
and it's fun. That's why I do this stuff like that. It's just fun because I still learn to this day. There's still things I learn. But it's fun helping with stuff that's not even related to my amps, like reminding people not to spend money on RCA and XLR cables past a certain, like, topics like that. Like, I love still getting involved in those just to help save people money and time and headaches that I went through.
So Home Theater Expert says he has a small question about LFE amplifiers. He was comparing like some ICE module amps and stuff like that. He was just curious on like, I guess, what amplifiers Buckeye can be used as a subwoofer amplifier.
So any of them you can, but as I've told people, if you came to me and said you're building passive subs from the start, I can't really argue against saving money if you with an ICE module, or depending on if you get a speaker power for the right price. Because for subs, what Purifi and Hypex do best with their distortion, their low distortion levels, and the noise floor and all that, it's mostly a fair game when it comes to subs. Like you're spending money. Like if you were to buy I have someone that keeps asking me, well, they want to buy an amp for their subs, and I'm not talking them out of it. I've just given them all their options, but they keep wanting to buy the new Purifi 9040 for their subs. And I was like, listen, if you're going to spend that money, the NC, what you have, Scott, the NC2K would be a phenomenal sub amp, 2,500 watts peak. Like it's perfect. But they keep saying, well, the Purifi 9040 is the newest and best reviewed amp. I was like, yeah, for speakers, but for a sub, spending that money for that power, you're not, though. If you put an ICE power and that Purifi next to each other, where the Purifi beats the ICE power at all other metrics, you're not going to hear that out of a sub.
Yeah.
So when people come to me and say, well, what do you recommend for an LFE or for building my own subs? If it's a small one, it's easy. You know, I can give you the 502. That's 500 watts. Like if someone's building small passive subs, once you get into like the 1,000, 2,000 watt range, I'm not going to shy people away from saying, look, ICE power for the cost, nothing wrong with that for subs.
Van Gool has a good question out here, and this ties another question in too. So he's got an Onkyo receiver after he says he might have to get a Buckeye amp after knowing all this. So I want to bring up two questions here. If somebody's used to a receiver and just wants to step up to nice RMS continuous power, you know, for all channels, is that where we're looking at like maybe the 252 8 channel?
So the 252 is the first step up I would recommend. And for most, I won't say most receivers, for most receivers, the 252 pairs best because of the pre-out voltage. So like an Onkyo, Yamaha, Integra, I know for sure their max pre-out voltage is just under 2 volts, and that's at max volume, which means, not to make it too complicated, the 252 pairs up best, and meaning you can drive a 252 to its full power with what an Onkyo or like an Integra or a Yamaha can put out in the pre-outs going to the amp for voltage. The Denon, actually, it's rated at 1.6, but as Amir has shown, you can get up to over 2 volts with that. So that opens it up to almost any amp. So that's the first thing I tell people. If you're using a receiver, the 252 fits up best to kind of step up. There's nothing wrong with, you could pair any of our other amps with those receivers. You'll still get more power than you need, but you might not get full headroom, but you wouldn't realize that because you're not going to need it. It's a weird way to explain it, but in transparency. So let's say, again, you have a Onkyo. Well, what's the best amp if I just want to get external amplification? Again, the NC252 would be great. But if you're someone that comes to me and says, well, I might get a processor, next year I really want to get an Anthem, but right now I just want to get the amplifier set up for when I do get a processor, I would say, well, then you can open up the ballpark to everything. Get an NC502, knowing that you might only be driving it to 70% full power now, but you're ready to get, when you get your processor down the road, you can slot it right in and you're at full power again. So there's some caveats. So that's why the more information customers give me, the better guidance I can kind of give them. But just if someone came and say, hey, I want to pair something quick and, best budget to my receiver, the 252 would do it.
So now that this question will tie in perfectly. So, I want to make sure I read this. Is from, his name was Jeff. I just want to make sure that I read this. Can you please explain RCA and XLR? I only have a receiver with pre-outs RCA. I understand you can convert from one to the other using adapters, but does that take away from sonics or add distortion or anything negative?
So adapters, yes. can add distortion and noise. That's why on my website I say RCA, keep it simple. RCA we call unbalanced. XLR is balanced. The main difference for almost any short run of cable, there's no, if you had an RCA versus an XLR cable in a short run, you're not really gaining anything using XLR. Longer runs is where it makes its it makes its name better than an RCA. But because of Hypex and Purifi, their design being balanced all the way through their design, they always have recommended that even if your source is RCA, so it's unbalanced, that the amp manufacturer, the person like me building them, should always still use XLR inputs and have the customer use an RCA to XLR cable. That's the best way just to prevent any unwanted noise or loss of, I guess if you want to say fidelity, just basically that's the best connection they like, even if the source is unbalanced. But it has to be a cable. And I say that on my website. If they do make adapters, so people have come to me and said, hey, I already have RCA cables. Why can't I just buy this adapter where my RCA cable goes into the adapter and, it's a female RCA end, and then on the other end, it's a male XLR and it goes into your amp? Because those adapters have been known and shown in a lot of usage and just people using them in their home setups to introduce unwanted noise or raise distortion. It's just a cable is always better. If you use an RCA to XLR cable, you won't lose any of the distortion. Like, you're not losing anything that the amp brings to it. You're still getting the same high level of or low level of distortion, the same low level of noise floor. The only difference is you may lose, usually you'll lose 3 to 4 decibels, not of headroom, because you can get that back with your speaker trims. But most people will say, oh, I hooked up your amp and now I found that my LCR had a speaker trim of like -1. Now it's 3 decibels. That's normal. That's the main thing you might notice. But again, that speaker trim level is making up for it. So it's not like you're all of a sudden losing power that, oh, well, I'm going to run out of headroom. Like I got this new amp and now I'm crippling it. No, you're not. It's just, that's, if you had a source that you couldn't change the trim levels at all, could be an issue, but that's very rare nowadays. But again, don't do adapters.
So Digital Don AV, I have a buddy of mine. He's also with Audioholics, and he's an integrator too. He's got a big pair of Arundel towers. I know they're power hungry. So I'm currently using them in this big system. They love power. Do you offer 500 watt per channel and 8 ohm or bigger? I'd like to light these speakers up.
So in 8 ohm, 500 watts, you could do the new mono block, the Purifi 9040. Well, actually, no, even that, I don't think, 500 watts, 8 ohms. No, because you'd still be, let me double check that, because I want to make sure I have it off the top of my head. I'm just pulling it up.
Get the mono blocks I got done. They'll start those speakers on fire.
There's a few options. So if you got the NC2Ks, you would have more than enough power. Yeah. But for 8 ohm, 500 watts, your best bet, actually, you could do, depending on how many channels you have to run, like if you had 2 channels, you could get a 4-channel NC502. So that's normally 350 watts into 8 ohms, but you can bridge them. So then you, instead of having a 4-channel amplifier, you now have a 2-channel amplifier, and now you're getting close to, which it won't damage your speakers, but it's more than you asked for. You're getting close to 1,000 watts into 8 ohms. So that's, again, it depends how many channels you need. If you're saying, hey, I got 8 of these speakers, then it gets a little complicated because you don't want to run 8 mono blocks just to get that little extra power. And you don't want to get 16 channels of amps just to get that extra power by bridging them. But yeah, so if you're talking like 2-channel, either the mono blocks would get you close to that, or the NC2K if you really want to go over that. Again, I have to remind people, having more power that's clean, the only way you're ever going to damage your speakers, even if you use Scott's NC2Ks like he's running on those speakers, the only way you're going to damage them is if you're purposely sitting in the room with earplugs in saying, I want to blow these speakers up. Yeah. Otherwise, normal usage, your ears are going to tell you, no, turn it down before the speaker gets damaged. And just to follow up real quick, someone just said add bridge info. The info is on the website. So if you go to our frequently asked questions, one of them does show you how to bridge them specifically for the NC 252 and 502, but only for 4 ohm minimum. If you bridge one of our amps and you run under 4 ohms on them and it damages, we don't cover that. And I specifically say that because once you bridge it, you're effectively doubling the minimum impedance that it should handle. So instead of 2 ohm, you're now at 4 ohm. So that's especially important for people that want to bridge and use it on a passive sub that's 2 ohm. Don't do that. I'll tell you not to do that, and I'll remind everyone.
Hey, this is my buddy Chris, 314 Carpenter. He has an 8-channel 502 and an 8-channel 252. My current config left me a couple amp channels open. Can I safely use them to power a couple ButtKicker Advance at full rated power down to 5 hertz? And I believe the ButtKicker Advance are 400 watt max.
I've had people, I can't, for that specific one, I can't give you an answer. I've had people use our amps and extra channels, and including 502 and 252 channels on various ButtKicker or similar type setups without issue. I've never asked them. I'm assuming for most ButtKicker, like for most people running it, I know they're below 10 hertz. So it should still be in the realm of, yeah, it's fine. The amp has so much protection in it that if the protection will kick in before anything disastrous happens. So it's not hard to say, I'm going to hook one of the ButtKickers up to one of my extra channels and just try it. I'm not saying, hey, I don't know in the realm of my, like, I'm not saying, oh, it's up in the air, just go give it a try, because other people have done it and it's been fine. But with ButtKickers, it's not something that I test so frequently that I can confidently say 100% every time someone does that setup, you're fine. I can just say that to date, anyone who's had my amps and done ButtKickers, no issues. But there's also protections built in that you can take my 95%, hey, you should be fine answer and say, well, you're not going to catch anything on fire. You're not going to blow up the ButtKickers. You're not going to blow up your whole entire amp. If it's going to clip or if there's going to be too much draw or anything like that, you're going to go into protection, the front of the amp will write up red or orange saying, hey, that was too much. And now you have your answer.
Okay. So you got all kinds of customers in this chat, man. Everybody. They probably, you should be working on building those as we're chatting, Dylan.
Hey, today was a half day of work. I did 30 amps in 2.5 days. I'm trying to catch up on orders.
I'm gonna put Prohib's question up and read it, and maybe you'll have some insight on this. I'm not sure. I want to power my new Altimax 18 and 15-inch speaker, but Buckeye doesn't have any offerings for 900,000, 1,200, or 1,500 to 2,500 watt amps will just blow the Dayton audio voice coil. Do you have any input on? I'm not familiar with all of your amps.
I'm not familiar with specific, like I said, specific setups.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, if you can blow something with enough power, depending on what you're asking it to do and how much you're going to drive it. But subs is a little different. If someone's, depending on what content you're playing and for how long, there is a max to everything. But for instance, like I said, you could take that NC2K and on a normal tower speaker, I would have no problem hooking it up where it's 2,500 watts, 4 ohms to my Paradigm towers and running it like normal and watching movies at reference.
Yeah.
But I know if I were to keep turning it up in that instance, my ears are going to tell me, hey, my ears really freaking hurt and something's damaging me before the speakers get damaged. But again, I can't tell you specifically for that sub because I read that he says later on that it's common for that to happen with those. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just didn't know if you had like 1,000 watt or 900 watt, like a 2-channel or a mono block. I didn't know if you had something that was maybe around 1,000 watts in a certain configuration. Because this is actually perfect, because if he's running 4 ohm 1,000 watt, then that bridging technique on a 4-channel amp would be perfect, right?
Yeah. And again, it is, my only caveat with that is when you're doing 4 ohms bridged, and it's a subwoofer, you're right at the max that the amp can do, because that's a huge load for it.
Yeah, because then we're talking about everything under 40 hertz, so much under 40 hertz and 20 hertz.
But for 4 ohm, I mean, again, and I don't know, with I just saw his follow up. Can I make it a 2-channel to be $12.50 per? No, that just wouldn't be. It really wouldn't work. I mean, it kind of would work that way with the power supply, but it also wouldn't, because I have to remind people that 2,500 watts is also the peak rating. Again, I don't know how that subcone is built, that it if you were feeding it that consistently continuous, I could see how it would be an issue. But for peak, again, I can't comment specifically on that exact cone.
Well, and just because it's 4 ohm, it might at certain frequencies measure at 2 ohm or 3 ohm.
Yeah, like I said,
what does that 2K do at 8 ohm? Pavel was asking. I wasn't sure.
I think it's off the top. I'm always going to look up. I believe it's 1,600 watt at 8 ohm.
I think that's what it was too.
I have to remember. Yeah, 1,600 watt at 8 ohm.
That's
so again,
insane. Yeah, I mean, yeah. All right, let me try to catch up with these. Well, yeah, this is. I definitely agree with this. Underpower kills more speakers than overpower. Definitely. All of us growing up at 15, 16 years old in our cars found that out, trying to push a 1,000-watt sub with a 300-watt amp.
Yeah.
Yep. That's great. Yeah, I see this. This is everywhere on every forum. Those NC502s, the 8 channels, everybody loves those amps, man. Great value, great power.
No, and that was the reason for that was finally bringing that out was because for a time Monoprice had their monolith line of Hypex where they had an 8-channel, which was fairly expensive. So I was like, well, I'm going to finally bring an 8-channel to the market, and it fits a lot of people's bills. It's a lot of, again, to me, it's a lot of power but for some people it makes sense though for them to use them for not just their LCR, but for their sides or their front wides or stuff like that. So it's been a good addition to the line 2 years ago.
Okay, this is a good question, Dylan. Actually, like 5 people asked me this question. RMS rating and peak rating on just say Class D amplifiers in general. They said it seems like that the RMS rating is very close to the peak rating. Is that necessarily true? And if so, how come it's like that?
I can't speak for other amps, but not necessarily. No. No, I've had this come up because dynamic headroom comes into a lot. And I think people get mixed up. Class D is actually, like the Hypex and the Purifi, excel at handling peaks above continuous. And a lot of that is because of the heat efficiency. So, for instance, let's take the Purifi. Well, let's take your NC2K. The peak is 2,500 watts, 4 ohms. Some people like to think that for Class D, kind of bring up like, well, they put in the peak and the continuous almost the same. Like, well, there's no headroom for it. I think the continuous for the NC2K, if you were to run it continuously at 4 ohms, is, I believe it's around 1,000 watts, which is a lot of power continuous. I mean, that's half. I mean, you're kind of running a heating station at that point. But what Class D does great is those peaks. And I think a lot of people, I have to remind this to them, a lot of people don't realize that consumer content is nothing like what we measure amps on a benchtop. So when we measure amps on a benchtop, it's a pure sine wave that is just hammering that amp is being abused to see what it can put out and for how long. And for Class D, heat is what comes into play. But it also recovers quickly. So if you take your NC2K and you're feeding it, if you're watching a movie and your LCR, well, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt that they're LCR speakers and they're crossed over at, let's say, 40 hertz. Let's just do that. That's really uncommon for theaters if you have subwoofers. and you're watching at reference, which is 75 decibels, but peaks of 105 decibels, most of the time, if you were to put a kilowatt on your amps to see what they're drawing, you're probably watching that movie at reference level, a nice action movie. I'd be surprised if, especially with your JTRs, how efficient they are, you're probably drawing easily under 100 watts continuous per speaker. I mean, easily. That's continuous. So your amps can hit that easily. And because they're so great at efficiency, they're not going to heat up that much that their peak power isn't hindered to be hit. The peak power is only limited in Class D by the heat. So like when we rate that 2,500 watts, it's after 5 seconds where the heat sink finally gets up to a temperature where it starts, the peak power starts coming down. So you're watching a normal movie, you're less than 100 watts, and all of a sudden an explosion happens on the LCR speakers for 2 seconds even. Well, it's hitting that peak easily, and then it comes back down, and the heat's already dissipated mostly, that the next peak comes up and it hits it, and the next peak. So most consumer content for movies and music that's why we call them peaks. Like it's up and down, where the amp can keep responding quickly. It hits that peak, and then the power draw comes down. And the heat dissipations, the efficiency is so great. Heat's dissipated, amp's ready, it hits the peak again, and it hits it again. Where the headroom discussion comes into play is actually with like toroidal power supplies, so Class AB, because they're so inefficient that they're already really hot. They're already, even if you're watching the same movie and the same, 50, 100 watt power draw continuous, that's a lot of heat in that when you start hitting scenes, that they need a lot of headroom to be able to keep hitting those scenes, because the heat doesn't get dissipated as quickly, and they're now getting saturated. Basically what I remind people, what I bring up now is RMS is not, for Class D, it's an important figure, but it's not what it used to be, because those peaks for Class D in consumer content, you can count on hitting that peak when you need it over and over and over and over again. It's not going to get heat saturated to where all of a sudden, it sounds like the sound's thinning because I'm running out of power. Class D doesn't have that issue. And that's kind of what I try and remind people. It's why there's a big discussion, even with the new FTC rule that requires continuous testing for a certain amount, there's a lot of people there's a period that opened up with it where a lot of rewrite might be happening, because people have written in that are actually smart industry people and smart engineers, audio engineers, that's not how these amps work anymore. So RMS is
a real good in-depth explanation too, because I believe that there's a lot of gray area there that maybe people didn't understand.
No, and that's why most people, and I was like this when I was into the hobby and thought I needed a lot of power. Most people put together a theater room and they're like, I'm going to watch it reference, and they think they need hundreds of watts of power to watch a movie continuous. Like that's what I need. No, you'd be surprised. Someone brought up the wormhole scene in Interstellar. Yeah, that's a good scene. But again, to get the most out of a scene like that, you're running subs anyways.
Yeah.
For most people, crossed over 80, 70, 60 hertz and a theater watching it reference, put a kilowatt on your left or right channel amplifier and watch it reference, and you'll be surprised that the average power draw over the movie is not what you think you don't need the power you think you need for continuous. It's nowhere close to what you think you need for a continuous power draw. The peak is where it comes in that you want, when those transients happen, when those quick action scenes and bass happens, the peak is what you need, and that's where Class D excels. It hits those peaks every time it's called on it's hard to describe what, like if you have a Class AB amp that is, you're running it so hot that all of a sudden it's basically throttling down. That's why some people say, well, my sound, I start watching a movie and the sound sort of thins out, or, it's not as full halfway through the movie. You're not going to have that issue with Class D, because again, what it's hitting in peak power is always happening. It's there. It's
almost like it's clinical. It's going to be exactly the same thing every single time.
Yes. Yeah. Again, now if you want to start talking about feeding, if you want to put it on a bench and feed it a sine wave and say, oh, well, I'm going to stress it, and all of a sudden, now the power rating is not what I would expect for continuous. Yeah, but you're not listening. That's not what consumer content is. We use bench tests to prove how robust things are to a certain point, but at a certain point, bench tests saying, well, I'm going to run a sine wave for continuous power at 5 minutes has no bearing on the way consumer content is.
That's funny, Pavel. Yeah, and then once again, this is just talking about, bass hits, but that's why you run 240. Yeah, and you get in there,
When you say continuous, like if the bass note is going on for 10 seconds, we can start talking. But if you're listening to like a bass track and it's boom, 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 that's not one continuous note. That's up, down, up. Like that's
and two, we've tried to run like a 10 hertz sine wave, and it blows the 200 amp breaker for the house. So there's just electrical requirements too that go into play and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't want to forget Bill. Bill had a great question, and this might seem silly to some people, but I think it was a good question. I thought it was. Is there any advantage between getting a stereo unit or dual mono blocks? I know the disadvantage is it would cost me more money, but is there like any sonic, like separating signals and stuff? Is there any sonic performance of doing that?
Not anymore. So crosstalk is the big one people bring up. Yeah. If you measure, so if you take our smaller Purifi module, which can be in a 2-channel or a mono configuration, if you measure it in 2-channel mode, which Amir has on ASR with the older Purifi 400A, if you measure its crosstalk and compare that to a mono of the same one, they're virtually identical. That's just where the technology has come. The crosstalk between a 2-channel Purifi is basically it's not anything you're going to audibly hear compared to the mono block. So when people come to me and say, well, why would I get a mono block? The two big things I say is placement. If someone is already set up where they want their mono block right next to the speaker and their speakers are really far apart and they don't want to run the wire, whatever it is, if it's because they want an amp at each speaker location, mono block makes sense. The other one is if we can't offer in 2-channel. I don't offer the NC2K in 2-channel because that would require it'd be what we call a dual mono. So in that case, the case is already going to be as big as offering 2 separate monos because that NC2K module needs its own power supply to hit the peaks. The 9040 Purifi needs its own power supply to get the peak wattage draw. So
basically it'd be twice the size case, 2 outlet plugs.
Exactly. Yeah. So if we're talking about if you're coming to me and saying, hey, do I want the Purifi 2-channel, or if you're saying I'm looking at 2 channels of Purifi and I'm looking at either the Purifi 2-channel 6525 or getting 2 6525 mono blocks, I would say get the 2-channel. You're not going to lose anything. They're going to sound the same. But if you're saying, well, I want the most power from the Purifi, well, you're going to have to get mono blocks because that's what they come in anyways.
Now, when you were just speaking about like heat dissipation and stuff like that with amplifiers, Ralph was on here. He was asking, he said, what is the recommended cooling requirements for these amps? Do they run warm? Do we need external fans? Are we allowed to stack? How much space is needed? I'm thinking about doing my 13-channel setup with amps like these. Just want to make sure I have enough room, and definitely don't want the amps to run too hot.
So they do run warm. The one misconception I'll tell people is Class D and Hypex and Purifi even put this in their data sheets. Class D is not no heat. They run cooler. They run a lot cooler than Class AB, but they're still warm. Like my 8-channel, an 8-channel NC252, one of them I have. If it's running for a while and I put my hand on the top, it's pretty warm. It doesn't burn me, but that's normal. And that's because most of the heat is trying to rise up out of that case anyway. So it's right there at the top heating the metal. So you can run them without any cooling and they're going to be warm. If you're going to stack them, you need to have cooling between them. And that's why the AC Infinity air comms are great things. They fit perfectly to the size of our, they have a 17-inch model that fits perfectly with our 17-inch case. You could do like a 8-channel NC252, an AC Infinity that sucks air and blows it out the back, and then an 8-channel 252 on top of that. Perfect. if you're not going to stack and you want to do passive and you don't want any cooling, at least 3 or 4 inches above the case for cooling is what I would recommend. Even for our even for 2-channel monoblocks, like that's perfect. The sides 2 inches at least, just kind of like a normal. You look at it like, all right, this seems like like what you would think. Oh, this is pretty good just to have some cooling around it. But if someone really wants, for longevity wise, not just past our warranty, but just for years down the line, we all know that heat kills over time. Even if it's a small amount, it can still build up. So I would always say, if you can fit it, an AC Infinity Aircom on if you're getting a 6 or 8 channel unit, the AC Infinity Aircoms, do it if you have the space. They look great anyways. They're great to have. They run, you can put it on the lowest setting, have it come on when, the temperature reaches 95 degrees or whatever. And they're great to kind of offset those larger channel counts.
Yeah, because for the people that are on our channel or on any of our groups, you can see how I stack the mono blocks, and there is not much room for them to breathe being stacked, and they do get a little warm. So I literally bought this little $10 fan that sits right next to them. It's whisper quiet, you can't hear it, but that literally, you put your hand on the side of the amp, front of the amp, it's cool. It's actually it's just cool. It's like you just needed to move that heat away a little bit, but that was my fault, because I was like, this is how I want them to look, but I know they're not getting good breathing room this way.
Well, and that's what I'd remind people is, since there's no active fan in those, the heat one thing with our cases, there's a lot of ventilation cutout. Some other companies almost market how small they can fit theirs in and how good their case looks with almost no ventilation, or really tiny ones. Ours has a lot of ventilation. The heat will rise. It needs to get out, but offsetting it with a little bit of any movement of air helps a lot.
Yeah.
It's like you can passively cool. I remember the days of building computers. We used to passively be able to cool CPUs, but then you realize, well, the fan helps. The fan makes a difference. You got to remove that heat somehow.
Yeah, exactly. Pavel, certainly appreciate the super chat. Like always, guys, help support the channel. I don't know. Maybe I'm not reading this right. Is OP?
No, I know what he's saying. So OP amps, that's the big thing. Like I said, so when I talked about how we have to build our own input boards, we call them buffer boards. Like, so Purifi they make the amp module. I have to build the input board that interfaces with it. One part of that input board that we have to build into the circuitry and integrate with the Purifi module are the OP amps. So some competitors have, I won't say made their name, but have made it to where you can change out the OP amp. So they're socketed. So you can, like, for instance, we use the TI OPA 1612 on our Purifi 6525 amps. Those are what Purifi uses on their reference board. So when they designed their Purifi module, that's the OP amp they were using, and that's why we chose to use it. It mirrors their reference design, how they like it. But other companies that build the same amp might use a socket and say, all right, well, we offer at the base cost, the TI OPA 1612. But if you pay a $150 upcharge, we might offer a Sparkos, so a different company OP amp, or a Weiss OP amp, or whatever OP amp. The idea there is they market it as, well, this will make it sound like Class A, or this will increase fidelity, or all these other BS marketing terms that are a grift. And I'm going to call that out right now, and I've been adamant about this. The best thing changing out an OP amp can do from the reference design is mirror the reference design. So if someone wants to pay more money to change their OP amp and hope that they have no negatives, they're going to maintain the same sound and design that Purifi meant. The worst that can happen is there are OP amps out there that have been measured and tested that degrade the signal. So there's OP amps that some people charge $300 as an upcharge to make their product better, that all of a sudden it actually makes distortion worse, or it might affect frequency response. So to me, it's a grift because Purifi already designed this amplifier to measure and perform at these engineering levels that were thought impossible, that these measurement levels that are just phenomenal, with a simple Texas Instruments OPA 1612. And now other companies like, oh no, we can do better. This OEM company made this OP amp that'll change the sound so great. It only costs the consumer $300 as an extra, as an upcharge. And at the best it will do is do nothing to make the sound better. That's the best you can hope for. If you're OP amp rolling, the best you can hope for from the reference design is that you're not degrading the sound. So if that's worth extra money to someone, I don't know what to tell them.
Okay. I didn't even know what that was. So I certainly learned something with that.
As Symphonic said, it's the alternative. It's basically what tube rolling was for Class A amps. It's OP amp rolling is what people back in the day would, I mean, it's the equivalent of, people changing out tubes on their amps for different sound types.
Okay. Home theater experts just want to say your amps brought revolution to the expensive amplification industry. Thank you for doing a great,
that's where I started.
It's true. It's I mean, when I grew up in the era, and when you just thought, oh, I need really big power, then you're just thinking, well, I got Macintosh, but that's so crazy expensive. Like, there wasn't many places that you could get low distortion, good signal to noise ratio, and more power than you could stand without, selling a kidney, really.
So, and I'll bring this up because I am proud of it, and I know some people might know the measurements did not speak what we wanted with Stereophile because we had a defective module we didn't know about. Stereophile was coming out. We sent them the new monoblock amps with the non-defective modules with everything fixed the way it should be, and their follow-up review is coming out in April. But it was funny that Stereophile reached out to me because they wanted to review Buckeye. They've seen us growing, and I love Stereophile, but it was funny to see that besides the measurement issue, which again it's not because we made a shitty amp or input board or anything. Some people wanted to point out it was because of our flaws. It was a defective module that got through on Purified's side. It was embarrassing to us, and I still feel sorry that I let it through and caused any trouble for Purify. It was a lesson learned for everyone, but it was funny that it was an inaudible issue that was detected in the measurements. And again, it's going to show in the new measurements that the follow-up review that it's not an issue anymore. It wasn't our design issue, but that Cal Rubinson, who's done so many high-end reviews, Stereophile has very high-end products in it, very like Macintosh type products. And he used our amp and compared it to his two reference ones he has. And all he could say was how great it was. He couldn't hear any differences, how amazing for $1,000 compared to all these other expensive ones, how great Buckeye was. And that brought me joy that it reminds me, I'm not trying to put people out of business or anything, but I'm trying to let people have access to what used to be considered niche or limited to, multi-millionaire or six-figure incomes. Like, no, anyone can have this now. And the Stereophile review, again, measurement review, the follow-up review showing that the measurements are great and that was a fluke. It just proves that point. Like, here's this case that some people say is one of the ugliest cases they might have seen because it's so simple. On the page of Stereophile, where above and below it are $10,000 amps that have these magnificent looking, aesthetics to them and names that have been around for a long time. Well, so again, I never envisioned when I started this, I never envisioned that, but I'm so happy it's gotten there because I'm happy for the customers that can come to us and spend a lot less money and get that performance.
Yeah, it is. I use some pretty expensive amplifiers in the home theater, and I only keep using them because there's no issues with them. But if some of them fails, I'm just going to get a multi-channel Buckeye amp because I'm like, there's really no reason for me to spend $6,000 on a replacement when I could get at least as good, if not better performing for a third. Like a third of the cost. It's silly when you say this kind of stuff out loud, but it certainly is. And I got one more question for you, Dylan. Like I said, appreciate you. You're on here about an hour and a half with us. All you people, I mean, we've had between 30 and 50 people on here nonstop with us, so that's obviously awesome. Thanks for spending your Friday night with us. And this, I know this question is going to hit home with a lot of us as hobbyists. I've been looking. Oh, you know what? Actually, I lied. I got two more questions for you.
Well, that's fine. You're fine.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll do this one first. This is John. My speakers are well known to dip into the 2 ohm territory often. I'm looking at your 3 levels of amplifiers. Is any of these amplifiers better well known to handle 2 ohm? I have an amp now, not a Buckeye, but claims 2 ohm stable. I listen to a lot of rock and a lot of country music, but it does go into protect often. Is the Purifi, the N-Core, the NCX? What is the better one to handle low dip? I do dip down into 2 ohm often, according to the graphs on these speakers.
Any of them. So I have not had anyone. I've had a lot of like Magnapan owners over the years that electrostatic owners, a lot of sub 3 ohm, even sub 2 ohms that have never had issue with our amps. On a bench top, when you stress measure them, they don't have an issue at all with 2 ohm. As I referenced, the mono blocks from Purifi that Ryan had, they handled 0.7 ohm. Like other amps of his would go into protection. Purifi's didn't. So really there is no wrong answer to that. It kind of comes down to if you're 2-channel and you're listening to a lot of music, I would probably say that just for that, the Purifi 2-channel or the Purifi NCX 500 would probably fit his bill the best. But he won't have an issue. Whatever route he goes, I can guarantee that.
So no thermal protect, no clipping. The
only clipping that would happen would be
if he's overdriving it.
Oh, if he runs out of power. It's not because the impedance is too low.
Yeah.
It's because if he's listening well above a level, or like I can never not guarantee clipping, but I can tell you that in normal usage, the one time I had someone reported back that clipping was happening was because he wanted to see how loud he had to go to get it to clip. It was an exercise in him. He wasn't negative. He just said, "Oh, hey, it finally took me to this level that I finally got it to clip." So,
and then now for the last question, and as a hobbyist, I can appreciate this one as well. Before pulling the trigger on an amplifier, which I think I've decided on which one I want, I have to ask, because I do suffer from buyer's remorse, is anything new coming around the corner from Buckeye that is going to make me think in a couple of months, dang it, I should have waited?
Let me answer this in 2 parts. One, because I saw a lot earlier. For anyone that's been watching, we still are working on our integrated 2-channel amplifier. It is not dead. It is not vaporware. I jumped the gun announcing it a year and a half ago because I was so excited about it. But we're still working on it to make sure it's the best it can be. When I say that we're down to basically we're just working on the firmware. It's not that, hey, we can't get it to work. We have to abandon our path. It's just honing in with what we want it to do. The firmware is a huge portion of trial and error and making sure all the features work. So it was asked earlier, and I just want everyone to know that, yeah, the 2-channel integrated, it's still on the radar. There's not a doubt in my mind that it shouldn't be out in some capacity this year. But that just answers a question I saw earlier that kind of goes with this. In terms of buyer's remorse for a new product, no. If you were to like, I'm going to buy a Purifi or I'm going to buy a Hypex NCX 500 amp from Dylan, you won't have any buyer's remorse. There's nothing coming out from those pipelines or that we're about to build that is going to be the next iteration. The only major thing that I'm trying to work on this year, like I said, is expanding our multi-channel to include up to 16 channels. But that's not even something if you were to buy 2 8-channels right now to get 16 channels, and then 7 months from now, I finally have a 16-channel amplifier all in one chassis out, it's not going to be better sound or measure better or anything like that. It's just going to be in one chassis. So in that terms, it's not like you buyer's remorse that, oh, something better came out that performs better. No, it's just a all-in-one package. That's my goal.
But from a performance standpoint, it's identical.
From a performance standpoint, what you see on the website, what we're offering right now, there's nothing that's gonna beat that. Like your NC2Ks, it's not like if someone bought those monoblocks like a year from now, like, damn, these new things just came out. Like, no.
Okay. All right. Well, tied you up for 90 minutes still, and you answered everybody's.
I just saw a good one from Siphonics because I get this a lot. Yeah, the Neil-Eye. Okay. So Neil-Eye, for the Hypex Neil-Eye is going to sound the same as Purifi and the Hypex NCX 500. The Neil-Eye, it measures a little better in distortion than the NCX 500, but that's on a benchtop, and we're talking like, I think 3 decibels. The Neil-Eye is really, Hypex is aimed at do-it-yourself builders because anyone can go on to Hypex's shop website and buy the Neil-Eye and build a mono or 2-channel amp. It's a DIY centered product. The NCX 500 is their OEM module. That's what I use. That's basically the equivalent of what the builders are using, that is going to sound and perform the same, but actually have more power. So like if you build a 2-channel Neil-Eye, I think you're limited because of the power supply. I believe it's like 250 watts per channel max or something, because the power supply is only 500 watts. Whereas the NCX 500, obviously, you can get a lot more wattage per channel. You can get up to 750 watts into 2 ohms and 4 ohms, or 700 watts, sorry. So I do get that. I did want to answer that. People come to me a lot like, when are you going to offer Neil-Eye? We're not, because it's meant for do-it-yourself builders for up to 2 channels, and it's a lower wattage overall, but it's going to sound and perform the same as our NCX 500.
So he certainly appreciates the detailed response. And I was unfamiliar about it too. So certainly a learning experience, and just offering a lot of great information. And that's something we're certainly trying to offer on this channel by bringing people like Dylan on. Next month, I'm going to have Mark Seaton on from Seaton Sound, and just get these guys. For us as enthusiasts, we have a lot of questions. And then for these guys that do this every day, they have the nice answers for us. So certainly appreciate you coming to hang out with me again, Dylan.
I appreciate it. I like it. Like I said, I always love being involved in this. So,
and for everybody that came on here, on a Friday night to come hang out with us and nerd out for an hour and a half, that was awesome. Active chat, cool seeing a bunch of people on here nonstop. So, what's the best way to get in contact with you, Dylan, if somebody has any more questions?
Email. There's a contact form on our website, or my email address right there on the website, dylan@buckeyeamp.com. I don't put my phone. I still don't have a business number, so it's my personal cell. That's why I wait. If someone really needs to talk to me, they can email me and I can talk to them on the phone. But I am looking at since I'm on my phone all the time, and even if I'm in the middle of building amps, I am checking my email so constantly that you're going to get a response from me and follow-up answers to your questions well faster than you might be able to get me on the phone, because it's just hard for me to carve out time on the phone. I'm literally always building or answering questions on my email anyway. I will email it back same day. If someone emailed me right now, you might even get me emailing back in an hour or 2 from now when I'm laying in bed watching TV. It's just a habit. It might be someone might call me a workaholic, but again, that's just how I've been since day one.
So, all right, everybody, man, it's been an awesome Friday night for us, and hopefully see you guys on the next live. Thanks for liking, subscribing, supporting Dylan, supporting us. We're all in this hobby together, just from different aspects. So it's certainly cool. Appreciate everybody's time. All right, Dylan, I'm going to end this, and I'll see you in the green room.
Thanks for stopping in, everyone.
All right, everybody. Peace out.